the Office of the President, Ministry of the Presidency, issued a statement speaking to the protest activity we had yesterday, and sent out a security alarm unnecessarily, because this protest was a protest done by the People's Progressive Party, Civic, and more protests will continue. And the statement suggests that there was some attempt to arm one Mr. Granger. And secondly, the police, they have been instructed to beef up security for one Mr. Granger and the other people in his cabal. You know, it reminds me when I saw the statement of a scripture in the Bible, it's Proverbs 28:1. He said, "The wicked fleeth when no man pursueth, but the righteous are as bold as a lion." And that is what is happening. You have the wicked fleeing when nobody pursues them, because our intention is to highlight the undemocratic nature of one Mr. Granger, and the unconstitutional and usurper role of one Mr. Granger in his cabal, and the illegitimacy of one Mr. Granger in his cabal. And our contention is that we, like the people of Guyana, will not allow a dictatorship to take hold in this country. And that is the fundamental issue. And it is not just for the PPP to fight, it is for all Guyana to fight, because we have evidence of what dictatorship normally bring on people. And so yes, Mr. Granger will expect more picketing wherever he goes. So right now, he has to deal with picketing in Port Taituma, Region 1. And every place he go, and every place these guys who purport to be ministers they go, they will be picketed, because presently they have no mandate to govern. They are holding on to office illegally, and therefore the way you deal with dictatorships and budding dictatorship is to delegitimize dictator. You cannot toddle, you cannot body dictate. You have to delegitimize dictator, and therefore for us, as of the 18th, President Granger is no more. Is David Granger. Nagamutu is no prime minister. He's Moses Nagamutu, and the lot. We can go on and on. And therefore, that is what you do. Because we have all the history that proves that people who coddled dictatorship, after they have done the deed to the state, they say that I didn't know the man would have gone so far. And therefore, we would not attempt to allow any such activity. We will call the government what it is, and we will continue to picket Mr. Granger. Let me say this, that all the subtle threats coming out of office of the president, it don't scare us, because we know our activity, our struggle is a righteous struggle. It's a good struggle. It is to right a wrong. And what Mr. Granger is ashamed about is that we have been able to strip him of this so-called godly cloak he had on. So the emperor right now is naked. And that is why yesterday he was astonished and dumbfounded, you know, standing, holding on onto the podium to get some relief and to catch himself. Because he presented himself in 2014, 2015, and deceived the Guyanese people about how moral he was, how righteous he was, how godly he was. But in the last 4 years, we have seen the ungodliness, the immorality, the corruption, the fraud, the lies and deceit he continues to peddle. Such as, I can give you one to remind you, agreeing with the opposition leader that he can resubmit the names of the 18 persons that were submitted earlier for chairman, and then he goes to the press a week after, 2 weeks after, lie that the opposition leader is being obstructionist because he has submitted names that should not have been submitted. And I can go on and on with the lies that he has made. And so, for us, Mr. Granger threats and the threats coming out of the office of the president and wherever, they don't scare us because we know the people of this country, even though silently, they support what we are doing. Whether they voted for Granger or not, they don't want dictatorship. They want this country to return to stability. They want an elections quickly so that a government with a mandate can govern this nation. And so I just thought I'd deal with that specific matter coming out of the Ministry of the Presidency, and to reiterate, we are not out to do no harm to Mr. Granger. Mr. Granger is doing all the harm to himself. And his cabal, they're doing the harm to him. They have been doing all the harm that has come upon Granger and his cabal. They brought it on themselves beginning the 21st of December 2018. So we will continue to protest peacefully, and we will continue to deal with the matters that as they come daily, and we will continue to internationalize this struggle to ensure that democracy stay hold and take hold in this country, because dictatorship is not good, and we will not allow it to take hold of this country of ours that all of us want to live in and plan to live in as a developed Guyana. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We had warned that when a constitution is overthrown, that what is threatened is also all the human rights of the people within the country. And so the statements coming out yesterday from the Office of the President, from the People's National Congress, which are threatening and talking about hooliganism, is also a threat to the right of people to assemble and to protest and to picket. And we saw it today in Mabaruma, Kaituma, where instead of the president concentrating on maybe deciding on the date for election, he made a trip with his cabal to these two communities in which protesters were there to greet him as well, calling for elections now and calling him illegal president. The police were used in that situation to keep the protesters away from doing what they wanted to do. But I want to show you a photograph here today of what taxpayers' money is being used for. This is a photograph from the outreach today by the government, and you'll notice very clearly there's a green carpet. This is not grass you're looking at, my dear friends. This is green carpet. You know, you used to have a red carpet rolled out for the president. Well, red is a bad color for the president, as you know. It makes him very ill. So that green, this is a green. Now this is a president who is illegal. We're not in a campaign mode yet, and yet he has gone to these communities with his green brigade, and now green carpet is the standard. This is using taxpayers' money at a time when the government has no legal standing whatsoever. The president has no legal standing whatsoever. And so if you'd like to see this later, this is available for you to examine more closely. For those who you might be a little skeptical that the green is grass and not the mat, the carpet. I want to now hand you over to my other colleague, Nigel Darmlal, to deal with a number of other issues on the same theme as Joe Hamilton's. Yes, go ahead. Oh yes, you go ahead.
Thank you, members of the media. To extend on my colleagues' earlier intermission, I'd also like to join with the rest of the country in calling on our citizens to continue to remain steadfast in our fight for return of democracy, protection and respect of the Constitution, and for us to stand against the desecration of the Constitution as is being perpetuated by Mr. Granger, especially since a lot of what obtains in the Constitution and required for elections are in the hands of Mr. Granger, which he has been refusing to deal with since December 21, 2018. This afternoon, or earlier today, the People's National Congress held a press conference, and after having listened to it, I think that there is a mad rush by the PNC to rewrite the history of this country. And I think that the delusion with which they treat with the issues of Guyana is affecting the entire psyche of the APNU AFC leadership. And I say this to the extent that it is a known fact now that the PNC is fearful of free and fair elections in Guyana. And I say this too because of the utterances that have come out of the PNC, which is the main political party in the coalition. One of the things that they have tried to foist upon the Guyanese people is the whole issue of the electoral list. The retired Gary Best, in a statement to the press earlier, again made mention that the current voters list is bloated by over 200,000 names. We have had no less a person than the chief elections officer who said, one, that when the president at that time had made the statement that the president was speculative. He had also said words to the effect that it is not true that a claims and objections period can resolve, sanitize, and have a proper voters list in place. So I think the PNCR, they have continued on the propaganda of misinformation, on the propaganda of fear, to deny legitimate, free and fair elections in Guyana. And we know that the history of the PNC and the history of this country has been written to show that the legend of the PNC is rigged elections. As a matter of fact, the 2015 elections have still been petitioned. The petition has not been heard yet in court, and we are heading into almost, well, the 5th year of this regime occupying office. We also know that over the last many number of years, beginning 2017, I think, with the unilateral appointment of at that time the chair of GCOM, that Mr. Granger had embarked on a destruction of the Constitution. Up until today, Mr. Granger has steadfastly on a daily basis continued to desecrate and decimate our Constitution. The Caribbean Court of Justice, the apex court of the region, ruled that that appointment was unconstitutional. It was flawed. They've also ruled that the no confidence motion was valid. They threw out the reasons challenging the vote of no confidence that Mr. Granger put on. And he has continued to, again, disrespect and disobey the Constitution. Our Constitution is greater than any one of us. We are creatures of the Constitution. And despite the distinguishedness of his office, Mr. Granger is not bigger than the Constitution. He must be held accountable also to the Constitution. So, all of that, the PNCR has been saying that he has displayed professionalism throughout his and honest leadership. I think those are fallacies which the Guyanese people are fully aware of, and we need to uncloak, as Joe said. We will uncloak David Granger for the person that he is. We also believe that protesting is a democratic right. Peaceful protesting is a democratic right in any democratic country, in any free country. And the People's Progressive Party Civic, we have a history of peaceful protests. Yesterday, when our protesters were in front of the Pegasus Hotel, some of them were inside of the lobby of the Pegasus Hotel, and some were in the event at the Pegasus Hotel. Everyone was peaceful. And I would like to commend the Guyana Police Force, an agency of the state that the PNCR has vilified for almost 2 decades. The PNCR has vilified consistently the police. And I would like, on behalf of the PPP and the citizens of Guyana, commend the police for their cooperation yesterday. We were peaceful, and the police engaged us peacefully, and that is how the PPP will continue to conduct itself until Granger names a date for elections, and until peace returns, freedom and democracy returns to Guyana. So there is no fear on our part in terms of our engagements, and no one, including the private sector, should be fearful of the conduct of the PPPC and its supporters during the course of the period forthcoming. We are also aware of the history of the PNC. Every single time that we have had public engagements where the PNC participated by themselves, they have destroyed this country. There is tremendous evidence until the 2015 elections in Sophia, in many villages across this country, where public property was destroyed. We've had that businesses burned, looted in Regent Street, as though it is a party of passion and a party that is of dignity. As a matter of fact, one of the greatest indignities that could be committed on the people of a country is the disrespect and the disobedience of the Constitution by the office of the President and by the person who sits in that office as well. So our party will continue to agitate in a peaceful way. I know too the PNC, during the course of their press conference, they sought to use terms indicating that social media must be muzzled. We feel, and in the People's Progressive Party Civic, as a matter of fact, brought freedom, brought free media back into Guyana, and we will continue to support free media. The world is watching, and we will continue to share with the rest of the world via social media and any other form of media to ensure that everyone knows what is happening and how our country is being destroyed by Mr. Granger and his ill-gotten policies and his refusal to obey court orders, his refusal to conduct himself according to the rule of law, and his refusal to obey and respect the Constitution of Guyana. We will continue to speak freely, we will continue to respect everyone, and we will continue to remain peaceful. So, and in closing, I'd like to recommit to the people of Guyana that the People's Progressive Party is the party that has proven and has a track record of development, of international engagement, of participation with international standards, in keeping with the mandate of our donor community, with our diplomatic community. We have all been engaged across these numbers of years. And one of the things that we've always done together is to respect the rule of law and ensure that the Constitution of our country remains supreme. So the people of Guyana, please be aware that the PPPC will continue to operate in that way, and we will also stand in the way of Mr. Granger and the PNC whenever and if ever and however they decide to disobey the Constitution of our country. This is not an issue of the PPP alone. The Constitution is about our country. It is about our national interests. It is about our sovereignty indeed, and it is also about our patriotism. And the most unpatriotic act that I've seen exposed over the last 2 years of the Granger government is his refusal. The most unpatriotic act is his refusal to obey the Constitution of his country. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Reading the PNC statement. Reading the PNC statement today really brought a smile to my face, in that here one reads a statement by a party that's on its way out. It's in its last days, I believe, as a party, that reminds me of what they did when you were a little girl. You heard the song of The Emperor's New Clothes, which Joe Hamilton referred to, and maybe that's a song of some of our generation, of the emperors being naked as the day is born. And the emperor, the myth of the Emperor Granger, is being cultivated, and in the article of PNC statement, you see it there over and over again in the PR of the government and the PR of the People's National Congress, of creating this myth of an emperor-type personality. And of course, for those of us who are old enough, remember that with Burnham. The same thing was done with Burnham, but his days came to an end as well. We have a number of other persons to present, make presentations, but before I forget, when they talk about hooliganism, we have to remember what they did to Janet Jagan as president post-97. The vilification of Janet Jagan, the number of days, every day in front of the office of the president, there were people throwing, what was it, powder, and saying this was ovia or whatever they were calling it. She couldn't go anywhere without being terrorized by the People's National Congress. And again, when the prorogation took place, there are many instances, I'm just giving two, with regards to Mr. Ramachar as president. So it seems as if Mr. Granger is awfully thin-skinned and not being able to deal with the fact that the right to protest, the right to assemble, the right to freedom of speech is, as far as we know, still alive in our country. And we will use that, as my colleagues are saying, to make it clear that we will not accept the subversion of our constitutional rule and democracy in this country by an illegal president. So can I pass you now on to Bishop Edgehill?
Thank you very much, Madam Gail Teixeira, ladies and gentlemen of the media. Since the events of yesterday, there have been a number of statements, and the manufacturers of excuses have sought to malign and to discredit the effectiveness of the protest action taken by the People's Progressive Party Civic. So in light of that, I searched for a correct description of their attempts, and I think I found it. And you, ladies and gentlemen in the media, will be able to do your research on it. It's an accusation in the mirror, or a human rights inversion. An accusation in the mirror and a human rights inversion. I'd like to speak to various groups of people today in my presentation. First of all, to all citizens of Guyana, including those who are joining the People's Progressive Party Civic, and all civil society actors, enshrined in our Constitution under Articles 147(1), which deal with fundamental rights. It reads, except with his or her own consent, no person shall be hindered in the enjoyment of his or her freedom of assembly, association, and freedom to demonstrate peacefully. That is to say, his or her right to assemble freely, to demonstrate peacefully, and to associate with other persons, and in particular to form or belong to political parties, trade unions, or other associations for the protection of his or her interests. No citizen should be intimidated by David Granger and his cabal that you cannot protest. No police officer should intimidate or seek to prevent citizens from this country from protesting. It is a fundamental right enshrined in our Constitution that I've just read from Articles 147. So I want to allay the fears of all people how they could find themselves in trouble. Protest is a right, and it says, for the protection of his or her interests. And what is our interest in this matter? Ensuring that Guyana returns to a constitutional democracy and dictatorship does not take over this country. So citizens have a right to protest. The second group of people I want to speak to is the Guyana Police Force and possibly the Guyana Defense Force. Since we have a president who's a former armed army officer, he ought to know this, but I want to speak to the Guyana Police Force, and I also want to speak to the Guyana Defense Force. I join with my colleague, Nigel Darmlal, in commending the commanders and the officers and ranks for the way they engaged the protesters yesterday. There were a few who were overzealous or probably taking instructions from outside of the regular. But by and large, from all intents and purposes and observation, the commanders and the officers were acting professionally. And we in the People's Progressive Party Civic would like to publicly state that we applaud the professionalism that the Guyana Police Force displayed yesterday. But I would like to speak to the Guyana Police Force and the officers and their high command. Articles 154A of the Constitution reads, subject to paragraph 3 and 6, every person as contemplated by the respective international treaties set out in the fourth schedule to which Guyana has acceded is entitled to human rights and enshrined in the said international treaties, and such rights shall be respected, upheld by the executive, the legislative, the judiciary, and all organs and agencies of government, and where applicable to them, by all natural and legal persons, and shall be enforceable in the manner hereafter prescribed. The fourth schedule of the Constitution indicates that we are signatories to the UN Charter on Human Rights, the European Charter or the European Convention on Human Rights. We are signatories to the Organization of American States Charter on the protection of civil rights and freedoms, all of which Guyana are signatories. I know one of the things about these conventions, they are courts and tribunals that are established internationally, that abuses by persons against the human rights of citizens in a country are enforceable in law in those tribunals and courts outside of Guyana. So I want to say to all the commanders and all the high command of the army who may be tempted to be overzealous, your actions will be internationalized, and you're not just subject to courts in Guyana, but you are subject to courts and international tribunals set up internationally to deal with the enforcement of these treaties. So, just a word of advice. The next thing I would like to bring to your attention is that we have had a number of persons who were shy in speaking, or organizations, and the leader of the opposition and many other of our spokespersons on various platforms have been calling them out to make statements, and we would like to commend the local organizations that have spoken today. The Guyana Bar Association has put out a very strong statement, the Bar Council of the Guyana Bar Association, and we'd like to commend them. We have seen statements from the Guyana Hindu Dharmic Sabha, we have seen a statement from the Muslim Youth Organization, we have seen a statement from the American Chamber of Commerce in Guyana, AmCham, we have seen a statement from the GCCI, and maybe there are others that we have not yet seen. We'd like to thank them, and FITUG, and we would like to encourage the others, including the religious organizations, more so the Christian organizations, that have given succor to this administration that is now in breach of our Constitution. But I'd like to deal with one particular agency, which is the Ethnic Relations Commission. They have put out a statement not so long ago, I think it's 2 days ago, and they were calling on GCOM to be ready for elections. And in their statement, they were seeking not to put the blame really where it belongs, and that is at David Granger. Well, I would like to send a message clear to the Ethnic Relations Commission. Maybe you should now call an emergency meeting today, because GCOM has already given the President timelines, and it's now time for you as the Ethnic Relations Commission to say to the President to name a date immediately. Now today at the PNC's press conference, their apologists in the person of a retired Rear Admiral, Gary Bess, this is what he says. The president will name a date for elections imminently. We're not asking for a date imminently. The demands of the Constitution and the demands of the citizens of this nation, through their organizations, through their representatives, is that you name a date for elections immediately. And we will hope that the Ethnic Relations Commission, a constitutional body, now that the excuses have been removed, the court cases, we can't speak because we are waiting on this, we are waiting on GCOM, all of the excuses have been removed, and not just the ERC, but all the other civil society actors who have not yet spoken. All the excuses have been removed. It's time for a date for elections, not imminently, but immediately, and we are making that demand. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also like to address another matter, and this has to do with our demonstrations. It would appear that the president was personally upset that he was protested yesterday, even though he was forewarned. I don't know why he's upset. It shows how thin-skinned and petty he is, and that's the language that we need to use. He's thin-skinned and petty. And I would like to say to the president, stop pontificating. Stop pontificating. Wake up to reality. Wake up to reality. He has now put out threats that he hopes that the intellectual authors of this kind of a protest, they can handle what is going to come and the rest of it. Well, and I noticed Mr. Gary Bess, even today, like I said, a PNCR apologist, saying that the Guyana Manufacturers and Services Association foisted the event on the president. The president could have said, I'm not going. The president could have simply said, September 18 came, I can't go. But as I understand it, he set the date. As I understand it, he set the date for September 19. And just for clarity purposes, all of us who were part of the Guyana Manufacturers and Services Association luncheon were guests with tickets that cost $8,000 each. And they were paid for. So let me make that very, very, very clear. And it is not the first time that the PPPC has fielded a delegation at the Guyana Manufacturers and Services Association luncheon. We have always participated in government, and since we're in opposition, every time we have been there. And we've always had a table. We support the Manufacturers Association. We support activities of the private sector. But when the president refers to peaceful protesters carrying out their constitutional right as hooligans, as a representative of people in this country, we cannot sit down and allow the head of state to refer to protesters as hooligans. But let's say protesters are hooligans. I am saying to not President Granger, I'm saying to David Granger, you are the biggest hooligan this country has ever had. You protested. You sat in the National Assembly when I faced you, and you beat on the table when Clement Rohi got up to speak in Parliament, when you tried to muzzle him, and he couldn't speak. You were the leader of the opposition, Mr. Hooligan Granger, when you led your 32, including Nagamutu and Ramjatan, to disrupt the Parliament, when you forced the Speaker of the National Assembly to vacate his chair without adjourning the National Assembly. Hooligan Granger. Hooligan Granger stood in front of the office of the President and demanded local government elections or national elections, and led the chants with the Fergusons and the others and the Bulkans. Hooligan Ferguson, hooligan Bulkan, hooligan ministers who are now pontificating as ministers. Don't you ever dare discredit Guyanese standing up for their rights as hooligans, David Granger. You're out of line. You've crossed the red line, and a rebuke is in order. You need to apologize to the people of Guyana for referring to them as hooligans. because you are the biggest hooligan, not only violating the Constitution, but now trying to use security forces to suppress the views of the people. I would also like to say to all the decent people of Guyana who believe that they should peep from behind their curtains and they should not get out in the sun and in the rain and hold placards. When people stand up for their rights, they not only stand up for their rights, they're also standing up for your rights. When the PPPC take to the streets to defend democracy, it's not just about the PPPC, it's about even those of you who want to sit in your ivory towers and peep from behind your curtains, and we will continue to represent the interests of the people of Guyana. So ladies and gentlemen, we are at a stage where we have never been here before. It's a political crisis. It's a constitutional crisis. And Granger must stop making excuses and name a date for elections. And I hope that all of the people who he filled the hall with, secretaries, and because the captains of business were not there, and you the media were there, I hope you can report that the captains of businesses in Guyana were not there, except for a few. They had the place packed with people who were genuinely pro-Granger supporters and public servants, lots of public servants. We know where they came from, we know them, we were in government, we watched them. But you don't ever use a forum like that to discredit the fundamental right of the people of Guyana by calling them hooligans. And all the critics who would like to write, not the Guyanese critic, all the critics who would like to write and demonize the actions that were taken, whether it's on the streets, whether it's in the lobby, or in the luncheon, you should be ashamed and bag your face, because what we are standing up for is not only our rights, but for the rights of all citizens. The PPPC promises and continues to engage with that passion that a government led by us will be a government that respects the rights of all the people of Guyana. I thank you for now.
Thank you very much. At Port Kaituma today, the President is reported as saying the following: I was invited to the GMSA event. I accepted the invitation because I believe manufacturers are important. The PPP organized protests and stopped my Minister of Foreign Affairs from entering the event, threatened to turn over her vehicle. That is hooliganism, and someone will pay for that. I underline that. Somebody will pay for that. We cannot allow hooligans to run the country. President Granger, or illegal President Granger, stated that to the people, or maybe the Green Brigade that turned out at Kaituma. I want to just add to what my colleague said, and that is that the President, by that statement, seems to be assuming the position or the authority of the police force of Guyana. The police force, as my colleagues have reported, behaved in a very professional manner, most of them, majority, yesterday. And if, I believe, and I was a Minister of Home Affairs, I believe if the police felt that the picketers were threatening the life of the minister by overturning a car, or what they said was overturning a car, then they would have acted. No one has been charged, no one was arrested, no one was removed from there as a result of what happened. And so the President is trying to create a fiction now, that there was this threat to his Minister of Foreign Affairs, and therefore somebody has to pay for it. Mr. Granger is not the police force of Guyana. He may be the Commander-in-Chief, or was the Commander-in-Chief. However, the police force did not find the events of yesterday one which warranted anybody being charged, arrested, or anything else. And therefore, this position by Mr. Granger of somebody has to pay for it is one in which he's trying to create a situation to charge people for merely carrying out their legal and their constitutional responsibilities of protesting what is the removal and overthrow of our constitution. So that we hope that some of the information that has been stated by our colleagues here will clarify and add to the situation responses to what the government has been saying and churning out over the last 24 hours. Maybe they were active like this 4 years ago, they might be in this position now. It is because they're now illegal. We have how many press statements? I think our colleagues would say there have been several press statements in between September 18th, immediately after Claudette Singh said she was sending a letter. There was suddenly a statement by the president putting in his certificate of readiness of what he required her to give her. And then we had also the PNC coming out, the Office of the President coming out, and so forth. And so the PR machinery is now awakened, and I'm sure they will be busy in the next few months as they have to clothe an illegal government with some form of respectability, which the Guyanese people will not believe anyway. So let me pass on to my last colleague who is waiting very patiently, and that is Peter Ramsuru, in relation to a number of issues with regard to the international community.
Thank you very much, Gail. I appreciate it. The greater madness is really affecting the people of Guyana. I mean, all of the madness that he has demonstrated over the last 4.5 years. You look at our economic decline, for example. He has stagnated our economy. He has fired the sugar workers. And when you now get in the state of an unconstitutional president, and you have the international community starting to put their sanctions against him, you know, the statement by the Americans, British, and European Union is very powerful. And what that entails is that, you know, they can't engage with the government anymore, and they've said that. They have to now stop all their investors coming in. No one can sign a contract if you're representing the American government in a business or the British government. Their advice to those companies is you cannot sign any contract with the current Guyana government. That economic impact will continue to have a significant blow to our people across our nation. And for a man of David Granger, an uncaring man that can look into people's eyes and allow this economic decline to continue and get worse. You know, we haven't even got to where oil money. Can oil money come into Guyana if he continues to stay in that seat in an unconstitutional environment? So we've got to continue to push. The business community is very upset. The AmCham statement, the other business community, businesses, as we travel around and walk around with businesses all over our country, it's been significantly impacted. The longer he waits for a date for election impacts the businesses, which ultimately impacts our people. The burdensome taxes alone has hurt our economy over the last 4.5 years. And this decision, or indecision by him to postpone elections so long and hide behind GCOM, will continue to have an impact on us. And we have Christmas coming up, and all of us know that you know, we want to ensure our kids get presents and able to enjoy the holidays, travel maybe. And now with this impact, the investors are, foreign investors are going to be hurting, and the American, British, and European Union and other diplomatic corps have to step up. You know, they can't even invite or be in the same room with Mr. Granger once this thing goes into effect. And you know, I've spoken to 2 British companies this morning, and they were in the process of getting to some funding from the British government to fund a few projects. They now have to back off because the British government will not sign any new agreement with an illegal government. And that's what is going to impact our nation. Mr. Granger, madness needs to stop. And I hope our people of our nation understand that it's not a political madness here. We, the people, are going to suffer and continue to suffer. And it's time for him to call elections and demit office as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. One will recall on the Wednesday that the chair of GCOM said that she would advise Mr. Granger, President then, of when GCOM would be ready to hold elections. And you recall that the President had a commentary with regard to his new terms that would be required. And And so the language that he gave was very, very interesting. He said that he had to be assured for credible elections that staff and resources were in place, printed ballot papers were in place, and all legal requirements and stipulations were met. And on those grounds, he would consider when the elections would be held. So there's no automaticity between the two things. However, in terms of a printed ballot paper, it cannot be done before there's a date for election. They cannot, how would you print ballot papers if you don't have a date for election? Or would you know who did? There's nomination day, who's contesting, unless Mr. Granger believes that printed ballot papers with only APNO AFC would suffice. And so this is where Mr. Granger has moved the bench, what do you call the goal post. First it was a date for when you're ready. Then he moves it to the certificate of readiness that he's calling about, in which he will consider as he wants to have credible elections. Translate, decode his language, and it is that when he talks about credible elections, it's an election where the APNO AFC will win. That's what he means when he says credible elections. Now, interestingly enough, Claudette Singh, as chair of GCOM, wrote the president, kept to her word, wrote the president, and said that GCOM will be ready by the end of February 2020. So she has done what he asked us, everybody thought. And certainly we were disappointed, because we all recall, a number of us were in that meeting with her, that she made a very, very clear statement and that said, I wish to assure you that we will have I am working towards elections long before the end of the year. The assumption by all of us in the room, it meant the end of 2019, it could not mean 2020, isn't that right? And so the issue was that here, what is interesting is that having said that, we then were disappointed that she gave a date of the end of February 2020. And we have a right to be disappointed. It doesn't mean that as the chairman of GCOM, that we will not look to her to uphold the law and the constitution of this country. No one is above the constitution of this country, nobody, including Mr. Granger. However, what is even more interesting is having done what was required of her by Mr. Granger, he then makes a statement yesterday that he did receive her letter. And first, of course, some of you were in the press where he said he did receive it and then he didn't have a date. And this was all very jumbled. And obviously he seems to have forgotten what he said a few seconds before, as Mr. Jagdeo pointed out yesterday. However, what is interesting is that Mr. Granger then says, but I want a date from GCOM. Now, I don't know if there's a comprehension problem, or that really Mr. Granger is going back to blaming GCOM as excuse for delaying, that he does not have a date for election. We all know that it is only the president who can name a date for election. All GCOM was asked to do was advise when their preparedness. And we remember that Mr. Patterson had written a letter saying, right, he says, we will be ready to be by the end of February 2020. The president now wants a date. Again, this is where the president is playing games and believes that in Guyana the people are stupid. The Guyanese people are extraordinarily bright and intelligent. And I've had enough of this. And so each time Mr. Granger moves the bet, what do you call the goalpost? Further away to prevent himself from facing the electorate. Because we believe when he faces the electorate that will be the end of the APNO AFC term of office. They're a one-term government and they have exploited and damaged the country during the 4 years they've been here. while we conclude this aspect, is that we are now seeing in the last 24 moves forward, it unfolds and shows its true colors and its true threats to the Guyanese people. And we've seen that very quickly in a matter of 36 hours. Hooliganism threats as no other person, and therefore he's accountable to the people and the electorate of this country. So I want to thank you for having listened to all of us express our views and what are our positions on a number of issues that have taken place in the last 36 hours. And therefore I'd now like to ask to open the floor to the press to make any, raise any questions, concerns, clarifications, etc.
Madam Chair, there are no
Yes.
questions. Let me just raise a concern that the media needs to pick up on. Gary Best at the PNCR press conference today says the police is reviewing tapes to see if any charges could be made against protesters. Please note that Mr. Gary Best is not a member of the Ghana Police Force. So Mr. Gary Best must make public. Is he using the PNCR press conference to instruct the police force on what to do? Or was he having leaked information from the police force on what somebody in the police force intend to do? But all of that, even if that is done, yesterday there were thousands of Guyanese that viewed everything that transpired. There were hundreds of cameras. There were people that were live streaming. People around the world saw everything that transpired. And there was no complaint of any mob violence, harm to anyone, damage to property. So what is the signal coming from Congress Place? The police force failed us because we expect our kith and kin to protect us. And that is why he even said the PNCR thinks that the police force did not act in a professional manner, stretching the opportunity to protest too far. That is what Gary Best told the nation today, that he thinks the PNCR, speaking on behalf of the PNCR, did not act in a professional manner. They allowed the protest to go too far. Well, Hooligan Granger and Hooligan Best and Hooligan Volder and Hooligan Ferguson and Hooligan Bulkan and Hooligan Harmon and all of them, and Hooligan Ramjetan and Hooligan Moses, all of them who sat there as hooligans, if that is the definition of hooliganism, must know that as a politician and as a member of the executive, you have to have a particular relationship with the security forces. You do not direct the police force in operational matters. And that is why yesterday in the Pegasus Hotel, while we raised our voices in objections to the president calling protesters hooliganism, Ramjetan got up from his seat next to the president and came to the police to give instructions, and I singled him out. Illegal Ramjetan wanted to give instructions to the police force. And I hope that our commanders and our policemen understand what the law says. You act contrary to the Constitution because we have signed these treaties. Your actions are not just enforceable in Guyana, but international tribunals and courts outside of Guyana. And these matters are being internationalized. We want to assure people of that.
Any questions, any comments, please?
Mr. Chair,
Introduce yourself.
Kristen McQueen, Guyana Times, I use TVG. When will the opposition, or has the opposition discussed when it will be going to the parliament to extend the life of the government?
The parliament is dead. There's no parliament. What are you talking about? Let's go back. Let me explain. What is the Parliament of Guyana? The Parliament of Guyana is the president the cabinet, the executive, the speaker, and the National Assembly. That is what is called the parliament. Not that building down the road, which is the National Assembly. So the parliament canon is comprised of the president and headed by the president, although the president is physically not in the National Assembly, not a member of the National Assembly. So when the Constitution says the president and cabinet stood resigned, and as of after 3 months you have elections, or you have an extension. The extension has to be done within the period of the 3 months. It can't be done outside of the 3 months. It has to be done within 3 months because the Constitution says 3 months. And therefore, that is why on March the 9th, when we met with Granger and said that, and Mr. Jackie put to him, we were willing to give him the 2/3 if he held the elections on or before April 30th. We went on March the 9th to him on that, and the reaction of Mr. Granger was silence. It was not even something that he was willing to say a word on, not even the word no. It was just ignored. And so we have lost the opportunity to go to the assembly now. And when September 18th came, after the CCJ said, you have now been paused, and now the time has now recommenced, so June the 18th, September the 18th, there is no cover now left for the legislature. The parliament is dead, it's gone. The president is illegal, the executive is illegal. Right? And so the National Assembly can't stand up on its feet by itself. It's part of the parliament. So there's no recourse back to parliament. It is over. You can't go back unless the president decides to use other sections of the Constitution, which he can't use in these times. But it would be ironic that he wanted to use a Constitution he threw out. But you know, we're all in Discovery Channel here right now. Anyway, we're on Discovery Channel right now because we're all in what you call, what are people calling uncharted waters. There's nothing in our Constitution to tell us what you do when a president throws out the Constitution. No one anticipated, all the drafters, and I want to remind the viewers too that when the Constitution went through the 1999-2001 Constitutional reform process, this no confidence motion section had been in the 1966 Constitution, removed by Burnham in the 1980 Constitution, and reinserted in the 1999-2001 period. The section to do with the extension was an innovation that was brought in at that time. But the original version from 1966 and what was taken to the constitutional reform was 3 months. This version of additionality was in case there's something has happened, something wrong, knowing how things happen in Guyana, you get a flood or something, you would have a possibility of extending. And so, this was unanimously supported. This constitutional amendment, this particular amendment was supported by everyone in the parliament. And in fact, many of these, a number of these changes were brought by the PNC and the WPA, who make up the APNU AFC now. So that we are in all the drafting and all the Constitutional Reform Commission debates and the thousands of meetings with people. No one, not one brain amongst us, no genius amongst us, could foretell, anticipate that there would be one of us Guyanese who would dare to be president and dare to not hold elections, not abide by the Constitution. This is how serious this issue is. And therefore, we will learn as we go along. What we're saying, though, as the parliamentary opposition, the People's Progressive Party Civic, is that elections, the president, now illegal David Granger, illegal President David Granger, must call elections immediately. And it is not our voice alone. It is the international community, it is the civil society that have been making this call before September 18th and after September 18th. We are not alone in this call. And if the media were to go and do a man in the street type of thing, and just ask people, do you want elections or not? You'll get your answer. And I swear, as a politician, you'll get 99% of the people say, let's have elections. let's get this thing done as quickly as possible. And as Mario Hastings said at the opening of the Armenian Heritage Heritage celebrations on September 1st, on behalf of the National Tushars Council, was that we are living in a state of uncertainty. We need to have elections soonest in order to return to normalcy. So this is not a view just of Georgetown people or Berbice people or Linden people. It is a position of the entire nation. And so Mr. Granger appears to think that he's living in some people said la la land, but I believe that in my own view he's behaving like a proper dictator. This is how dictators believe and behave, that the rest of the world has no legitimacy except their own. So I'm sorry you don't have any questions, and maybe we've made you, or have we been giving you so much stuff, or that you know it already, or hopefully that we made things clearer from our position.